Dry Creek wasn't much in the way of towns. Just a crooked stretch of boardwalk, a few stubborn buildings that leaned into the wind like tired mules, and a sky so wide it made a man feel small even when he stood tall. It was summer in 1887, the kind where the sun showed no mercy and the dust clung to your boots like it had a grudge. Jedediah Crowe didn't believe in fate, letters, or much of anything anymore. He believed in cows, grumpy, slow, grass-chomping cows, and in keeping his land running. He had no use for frills or nonsense, and certainly no room for a wife. But life has a funny way of turning corners when you least expect it. The letter came from back east. He hadn't written it. His sister Clara had. Bless her meddling soul. "You need someone to keep house and soften that gruff hide," she'd said, sealing it with her own handwriting and sending it off to one of those matchmaking catalogs in Chicago. Jed had near thrown his coffee across the room when she told him, but he didn't send a second letter. He didn't cancel it either. And so, on a Tuesday hotter than the devil's frying pan, Jedediah found himself standing at Dry Creek's train platform, arms crossed, jaw set, waiting for something he didn't quite believe in. The train groaned in like a wounded animal, wheels screeching against the tracks, smoke billowing high into the heat. She stepped down slowly, careful-like, one hand holding a modest carpetbag, the other clutching her shawl, though the day was far from cold. Her eyes were what struck him first, big, brown, and brimming with tears that hadn't yet spilled. She weren't no fragile porcelain thing, though. She was sun-browned and steady on her feet. Her dress was plain, her boots scuffed, and her chin held high despite the tremble in her lip. Name was Liddy Harper, and she looked around like the town had let her down before she even got started. Jed took his hat off, cleared his throat, and stepped forward. "Miss Harper." She turned to him slow, like each second hurt. "You must be Mr. Crowe." "I am." A silence hung between them like laundry on a still day. Then, with that voice soft as a creaked in spring, she said, "There's been a mistake. I thought someone would be happy to see me." Jed stared a second longer than a decent man should. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that plain kind of way that snuck up on a man, but because he'd never seen someone look so alone. "I didn't write the letter," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "My sister did." Liddy's face fell. Her grip on the bag faltered, and for a second, Jed thought she might cry right there on the platform. But she didn't. She straightened, sniffed once, and nodded. "I see. Well, I won't be a burden. I'll find a place in town." Jed looked around. Dry Creek didn't have a spare room that didn't smell of stale whiskey or unwashed poker players. His jaw worked, thoughts clanging around in his head like loose tools in a wagon. "You can come back to the ranch," he said finally. "At least for the night. There's a spare bed. You can decide what you want in the morning." And just like that, the story began, not with a kiss, or a wedding, or sweet words, but with a begrudging offer, and a woman who had nowhere else to go. The wagon jolted and creaked as Jed steered them out of town. The sun hung low now, gold bleeding across the prairie. Liddy sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon like she was afraid to look back. Jed didn't talk much. Never did. His words came like rain in the desert, rare and hard-earned. But even he could feel the weight between them, thick as the summer heat. "You ever been out west before?" he asked finally, not looking her way. She shook her head. "Only ever saw it in books. My brother sent me dime novels when I was younger. Cowboys, ranches, endless skies." Jed chuckled, a dry sound. "That's so. Those books don't mention the flies, the dry wells, or cows too dumb to walk through an open gate." "No," she said, lips curling faintly. "They never do." They rode in silence after that. The wind kicked up now and then, scattering dust and dried grass, the scent of sagebrush riding along with it. When they reached the ranch house, stubborn and squat against the prairie, Liddy's breath caught. It wasn't much, but it stood proud. Wood faded by sun and time, roof patched but solid, a windmill turning slow in the breeze. Jed helped her down. "Spare rooms on the right. There's a lock on the door," he added, not unkindly. She hesitated at the porch step, then turned to him. "Thank you for the ride. For the room." He gave a nod. tipping his hat. "Ain't no trouble." Inside, the house smelled of leather, old wood, and something like coffee that had boiled too long. Liddy moved quiet as a whisper, setting her bag on the narrow bed in the spare room. The window looked out across a sea of grass, turning orange under the setting sun. She pressed her forehead to the glass, the warmth fading against her skin. She didn't cry. Not then. But later, when the house was still and Jed's heavy boots had stopped pacing the floor, she sat on the edge of the bed and whispered into her hands, "What am I doing here?" Across the hall, Jed lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He could still see her face, those sad, wide eyes like something had been taken from her and never returned. He told himself it wasn't his fault. He hadn't asked for her. But the image of her standing alone on that platform, lost and trying not to show it, clung to his thoughts like burrs to a blanket. Outside, the coyotes called. The wind sighed through the grass, and two strangers lay awake in separate rooms, each wondering what came next. Morning broke slow and golden, the kind of sunrise that don't make noise, but lets its light spill through the cracks quiet-like. Jed was already outside by the time the rooster crowed, feeding the cattle, checking the fence line, doing the things he always did. Routine was a man's armor out here, kept the past from biting too hard. Inside, Liddy stirred. She rose, washed her face with water cold enough to make her gasp, and braided her hair neat. She smoothed her skirt, buttoned her bodice tight, and stepped into a life that didn't yet have a name. She found the kitchen empty but clean, the coffee pot still warm. A pan of cornbread sat covered by a towel. She smiled faintly, touched by the gesture, even if Jed didn't say as much. She poured herself a cup, bitter and dark, and sipped it slow as she watched the prairie wake up through the window. A knock on the doorframe made her jump. Jed stood there, dusty and quiet, hat in hand. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am," she said, her voice soft but steady. He nodded, shifting his weight. "I'll be heading out to the north pasture after breakfast. Fence needs mending." "Is there anything I can do?" she asked, setting her cup down. Jed blinked, surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said simply. "I came here to help, if that offer still stands." He studied her a moment. "All right then. Hope you ain't afraid of blisters." She smiled, the first real one he'd seen from her. "Blisters I can handle." The day grew hot, sun high and unrelenting. Jed handed her gloves, thick and worn, and taught her how to hold the wire without tearing her hands. She listened close, didn't complain, not even when the sweat made her dress cling or her palms ached from pulling tight on the pliers. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The work spoke for them, honest, hard, and strangely comforting. By the time they sat under a cottonwood for shade, sharing a tin of beans and jerky, Liddy felt something stir deep down. Not love, not yet, but maybe the seed of something. Respect, perhaps. Trust. Jed passed her a canteen. "You got grit," he said. Liddy took a sip, then looked at him. "Is that your way of saying I did all right?" He gave a small smile. "Something like that." They rode back in the golden light, the sky painted with streaks of fire. At the porch, Jed hesitated. "I got an extra book or two, if you're the reading type." "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you." Later that night, Liddy sat by the lamp, thumbing through a tattered novel about some outlaw in the Rockies. The house was quiet, save for the creak of wood settling and the soft sound of pages turning. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't feel so lost. The prairie wind blew gentle that next morning, brushing across the fields like a mother's hand on a fevered brow. Liddy stepped out onto the porch with a pail in one hand and a basket in the other. She wasn't just passing time anymore. She was learning the rhythms of the land. Jed watched her from the barn, arms folded. She moved with purpose, grace in her steps, sleeves rolled up and boots scuffed. She wasn't some wilting flower from back east. No, Litty Harper was the kind of woman who took root in hard soil and still bloomed. At supper, they shared stew and silence, the kind that had grown comfortable, like old leather. Liddy looked up from her bowl. "You ever write back to your sister?" she asked. Jed shook his head. "No use." She's got her life now. A husband in Wichita. 2 boys. I reckon she don't need my troubles dragging her down. Liddy looked down, stirring her spoon. Still, she said, folks don't write just to be heard. Sometimes they write hoping someone still listens. He didn't answer, but later, as the oil lamp flickered low, he sat at the table, pulled out an old sheet of parchment, and stared at it a long while before scratching out a few rough lines. Just Clara. Hope this finds you. And nothing more. But it was a start. Outside, the crickets sang in the tall grass, and somewhere a coyote called out to the night. The next day brought visitors, a rarity this far out. It was Will Hargrove and his boy, neighbors from 5 miles north. Will was talkative as ever, tall and wiry, with a laugh like dry corn husks. He'd heard about the mail-order gal from town, and curiosity got the better of him. Liddy greeted them with biscuits and sharp eyes. Didn't think Jed had it in him. Will chuckled. Woman turns up, and the whole ranch starts running smoother. Jed didn't smile. We ain't married, Will. No. Will raised a brow. Folks in town got it all twisted then. Word travels faster than a jackrabbit these days. Liddy flushed, but stood tall. Ain't no shame in helping someone build a life, even if it don't fit inside a preacher's book. Will blinked, then grinned. Fair enough. When they'd ridden off, Jed stood quiet at the fence line. I don't care what they say, Liddy offered gently. Jed looked at her. Maybe I do, he said. Not because of them, but because of what I see when I look at you. She met his gaze, steady as sunrise. And what's that? He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The days rolled by like lazy cattle across the summer range. Liddy had taken to the ranch like a seed to fertile ground, baking fresh bread, mending saddle straps, and even fixing the old well pump with nothing more than grit and a bent hairpin. Jed noticed things, how she hummed when she worked, how her hands were always busy, how her eyes studied the land like she wanted to belong to it. But one evening, the sky began to change. It started with a heat that sat heavy on your chest, like the prairie itself had stopped breathing. Then came the wind, strange and restless, tugging at the porch curtains like a child needing attention. Jed stood out by the barn, hat pulled low, squinting at the horizon. Storm, he muttered. Liddy joined him, shading her eyes. I've seen storms back home, she said. This one's different. And it was. A wall of clouds darker than a sinner's conscience rolled over the hills, jagged with lightning and full of soundless promise. Jed moved fast, tying down the barn doors, bringing the herd in close, securing what could be secured. Liddy followed unafraid, sleeves rolled and hair whipping wild. The first crack of thunder came just as the sun vanished behind the clouds, a roar that shook the ground beneath their boots. Inside the house, they lit every lamp and shuttered the windows. The wind screamed like it had been waiting all year to let loose. Rain came down sideways, hard and mean, pounding the roof with the rhythm of judgment. Jed looked at her as the house trembled. You scared? She shook her head, her voice firm. Only of not having a roof come morning. That made him smile. They sat by the hearth as the storm rattled every nail in the boards. Liddy pulled her shawl tighter and reached into her carpetbag, drawing out a letter, old and creased. This, she said, is the letter that brought me here. I read it 100 times. It made promises I believed in. Jed leaned forward. You regret it? Liddy looked him dead in the eye. No, but I thought I was coming to meet a man ready for a wife. Turns out I came to meet a man learning to be one. That quieted him, not in shame, but in reflection. Thunder rolled, low and long. A moment passed. Then Jed reached over and gently took the letter from her hands. He studied it, then folded it careful, like something sacred, and handed it back. I can't undo what brought you here, he said, but I can give you a reason to stay. Liddy didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The silence between them was thicker than thunder and just as powerful. And in that little ranch house on the edge of Dry Creek, while the sky cracked open and the prairie wept, something took root that no storm could wash away. After the storm passed, the land smelled new. Rain had softened the dust, and the prairie shimmered under the morning sun, like it had just been born again. Puddles spotted the hardpan, and the wildflower stood taller, almost smug with survival. Liddy stepped outside, sleeves rolled, boots muddy, and heart a little less heavy. She walked the fence-a-line with Jed, both of them scanning for breaks. They worked side by side without much talk, just the rhythm of shared effort, the occasional grunt, and the creak of old leather. Near midday, Jed pointed toward the ridge. There's something there. Liddy squinted. Smoke. They rode out hard and fast. A lightning strike had kissed the dry grass and set it aflame. The wind, still moody from the night before, was feeding it like a jealous lover. Jed and Liddy didn't hesitate. They broke branches, dug lines, and beat the flames with whatever they could find. It was dirty, blistering work. Ash clung to their skin. Sweat streaked through soot. But they didn't quit. When the fire finally gave up, smoldering into the earth like a sullen child, they stood blackened and exhausted, watching the smoke drift upward in slow spirals. Liddy coughed and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. I didn't know I had that in me. Jed looked at her, his voice quiet. I did. They rode back slow, not because the horses were tired, but because neither of them wanted to rush the silence that followed, a kind of silence that felt like a feather drifting down after a long fall. That night, Jed pulled out an old wooden box from beneath the bed. Inside were letters, dozens, some from his sister, most never opened. Others were his own, drafts never sent, written and abandoned when the words turned too heavy. He handed one to Liddy. Read it. She unfolded it with care. It was dated over a year back. In it, Jed talked about loneliness, the weight of a quiet house, and the memory of a woman he once tried to love and failed. He didn't paint himself as a hero, just a man trying to make peace with his own stubborn heart. When she finished, she looked up, eyes shining. Why didn't you send it? He shrugged. Didn't think anyone wanted to read it. Liddy smiled then, soft and true. You're wrong. Jed sat beside her, close enough their shoulders touched. You still think about leaving? She shook her head slowly. No, I think about staying, but not for the same reasons I came. Outside, the night settled in again, cooler now, calmer. Inside, the distance between two people was measured no longer in miles, but in inches, and neither one felt quite so alone anymore. Summer days stretched long now, thick with heat and the slow hum of prairie insects. The ranch had settled into rhythm, fences mended, horses groomed, and even the chickens had started laying again. Liddy and Jed worked easy beside each other, like two rivers carving the same path. But good things, they say, draw shadows. It was just after sundown when they came, 3 riders, silhouettes against the glowing west. Jed saw them first, standing out on the porch with a tin mug in hand. He didn't move, just watched as the horses drew closer, kicking up dust like a warning. Liddy came to the door, sensing the change in the air. You know them? Jed nodded once, jaw tight. I do. The lead rider was Cole Fincher, a name Jed hadn't heard in years. They used to ride together back in Montana, back when Jed still carried a gun more than a shovel. Cole was trouble-dressed in charm, a grin full of lies, and a fast hand for cards or pistols. Evening, Crowe. Cole called out as he swung off his horse. Heard you got yourself a mail order, missus, and a slice of land. Thought I'd pay a visit. Jed didn't smile. Don't recall sending an invite. Cole looked past him, eyes landing on Liddy. Ain't she a picture? Makes a man wonder what he's been missing. Jed stepped forward, calm but solid. She ain't yours to wonder about. The tension cracked like dry kindling. Cole's grin faded. Still got that fire in you, huh? Jed didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them carried the weight of old debts and bad blood. You just passing through? Jed asked, voice low. Cole shrugged. Might be looking to stay a while. Me and the boys could use work. Or comfort. Whatever's easier. Liddy stepped out then, chin high, eyes like polished flint. This land spoken for. There's no comfort here for men who don't respect it. Cole gave a slow nod, almost impressed. Well now, you got yourself a sharp one. Jed's hand hovered near his hip, though his holster was empty. Right on, Cole. Cole looked around. the way a man might assess a barn before deciding whether to burn it. Then he swung back into the saddle. "For now," he said, "but I'll be seeing you, Crow." The dust hadn't even settled before Liddy turned to Jed. "You think he's coming back?" Jed stared into the dark. "Yeah, he will." That night, he sat by the fire, the old Colt revolver he'd buried deep in the trunk now cleaned and loaded on the table. Liddy watched him from the shadows. "You said you didn't need that life anymore," she whispered. "I don't," he said. "But sometimes that life don't let go." Outside, the stars blinked cold and distant. But inside that house, two souls sat ready, not just for the trouble that rode with the wind, but for whatever it tried to tear apart. The next few days passed like a cattle drive under dark skies, tense, slow, and filled with watchful eyes. Jed kept to his routines, but there was a new weight in his steps, a different edge to the way he checked the barn door or scanned the horizon. The rifle stayed leaned against the doorframe now. The porch light never went out. Liddy didn't ask questions, but she knew. She could see it in the way Jed's shoulders stiffened at every hoofbeat, in the way he walked the perimeter at dusk, silent as a ghost. She followed sometimes, quiet beside him, holding a lantern while the stars blinked overhead like distant warnings. They spoke little, but their silences said plenty. That Wednesday morning, word came by way of Elias Boone, the male driver. He came lurching up the drive, breath ragged, one hand bloodied. "Ran into him near Miller's Creek," he gasped. "That Cole fella and his men had your name in their mouths, Jed. Said you'd taken something from him." Jed's face didn't change. He just helped Elias off the wagon and handed him a cup of water. "What did you take?" Liddy asked later, once Elias was gone. Jed sighed. "A second chance. Cole don't believe a man like me ought to have it." That night, Liddy made stew with the last of the potatoes. Jed ate quiet, one hand resting on the table near the revolver. Liddy watched him a long moment. "You scared?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "I've stared down barrels before. Been shot at, stabbed, left for dead. But scared." He paused. "Only when I think about what I might lose this time." She didn't speak right away, just reached out and touched his hand. "You haven't lost me yet." After supper, Jed walked to the barn to check the horses. Liddy cleaned the dishes, then slipped outside into the cooling night air. She walked down to the garden plot, hands wrapped around herself, heart thumping with questions she couldn't quite name. That's when she saw the shadow. It moved just beyond the fence line, quiet and low, like a snake slipping through tall grass. She dropped to one knee, heart hammering. "Jed," she whispered into the dark. "Jed, someone's here." He was beside her in moments, rifle raised. They crouched together, listening. Then a voice came low and cruel across the wind. "You should have stayed in Montana, Crow." Jed straightened. "You're trespassing, Cole." "No law out here to stop me," Cole answered. "Just you. And you ain't who you used to be." Jed didn't hesitate. "I'm more than I used to be." A shot cracked. The barn door splintered. Jed grabbed Liddy's arm and pulled her behind the water trough. Dust and smoke filled the air. "You all right?" he asked, pressing close. "I'm with you," she said, teeth clenched. Then came the silence, that heavy, waiting kind. Jed knew it well. It was the kind of silence that came just before hell let loose. The wind had gone still, holding its breath like the earth itself was waiting on a gunshot. Jed crouched low beside the water trough, eyes fixed on the barn. The last bullet had torn a hole clean through the side wall, leaving a shaft of moonlight shining through. Beside him, Liddy's breath came fast but steady. She held her ground, a rusted hammer clutched in white-knuckled fists. "Get to the house," Jed said, voice firm but low. "Bolt the door. Keep your head down." "I'm not leaving you," she shot back. Jed looked at her, really looked. In her eyes he saw the same fire he'd felt out on the range, the same steel that had driven nails, weathered storms, and faced down shame with her back straight. She wasn't some damsel out of a storybook. She was his equal. So he didn't argue. Another voice rang out from the dark. "Come on, Crow. Give us the girl, and we'll leave you the land." Jed stood slow, rifle raised. "You come to my land talking about talking women? You picked the wrong man, Cole. A shot cracked again, closer this time. Jed fired back, the sound thundering through the yard. Then came the shuffle of boots on hardpan and the low, cussing grunts of Cole's boys trying to flank him. But Jed knew the terrain. He knew the dips and rises of this land like he knew the lines in his own hands. He moved quick, pulling Liddy along the side of the trough, toward the corral fence. I got 2 shells left. After that, it's hands and grit. Liddy gave a tight nod. Good. I've got plenty of grit. A shadow moved fast across the yard, a man breaking from cover. Jed spun, fired. The shape collapsed in the dirt with a cry. Another came from the far side. But Liddy, Lord bless her, hauled off and cracked him across the head with that hammer when he got too close. When it was over, the yard was smoke and groans. 2 of Cole's men lay wounded, the third run off into the night. Cole himself stood there, panting, blood on his sleeve. You should have just let her go, he growled. Jed stepped forward. I didn't bring her here. She came on her own. Cole sneered. You think that means anything? You think it matters out here? Jed leveled the rifle. It matters to me. A beat passed. Then Cole made his move, but not fast enough. Jed's rifle cracked, and Cole dropped, clutching his leg. Jed stood over him. You don't ride again, till you learn what respect means. He let him lie there, bleeding and broken. The law'd find him in the morning. Let the world see what kind of man he really was. Later, back inside, Jed cleaned the rifle with hands that trembled. Liddy stood at the stove, pouring 2 mugs of coffee like it was just another morning. You all right? She asked. Jed nodded. I am now. She came to him, handed over the mug, and touched the back of his hand. I think I found what I came for, she said quietly. What's that? A man worth staying for. The morning after the gunfight, Dry Creek woke slower than usual. Word spread fast out here, like prairie fire in a windstorm. Folks rode out to the Crowe place before the rooster even stirred, eyes wide with talk of gunshots and wounded men. But they didn't find chaos. They found calm. Jed was already in the yard, repairing the busted barn door. Liddy was hanging laundry, as if she hadn't brained a man with a hammer just 12 hours earlier. And though no one said it plain, they saw something different in the way the 2 stood side by side. Respect, quiet strength, something real. Sheriff Wilkes showed up with 2 deputies, one of them dragging Cole Fincher in a sling. The lawman didn't ask many questions. Jed's word was good, and Cole's bad luck had finally outrun his charm. They took him to the jailhouse, and by evening, that piece of trouble was someone else's concern. Later, under the cottonwood by the house, Jed sat with a paper in one hand and a pen in the other. Liddy stood nearby, arms crossed, brows raised. You sure? She asked. Jed looked up. You came here thinking you'd be someone's wife, and I treated you like a stranger. You didn't ask for me, she said gently. No, Jed admitted, but I thank God every day that you came anyway. He signed his name, steady, slow, on the bottom of the form. Then he handed it to her. Only if you still want it. Ain't no expectations, Liddy. Just hope. She read the paper, lips trembling. It was a marriage license, simple and clean. No flowery vows. No promises he couldn't keep. Just a line with her name and his, side by side. She smiled. Hope's a good start. They wed under that cottonwood 2 days later. No preacher, just the sheriff and a half-dozen neighbors. The sky was clear, the breeze soft, and the land quiet for once. Jed said his vows in a voice that shook a little, and Liddy squeezed his hand just to steady it. They didn't ride off into the sunset. They stayed, built a life on dust and firelight, on old scars and second chances. She planted flowers along the fence line. He built a swing from the old sycamore. They fought sometimes, laughed more often, and always came back to that porch at dusk, 2 silhouettes leaning into each other like old trees in the wind. He never wanted a mail-order bride, but he sure was thankful she stepped off that train, eyes full of tears and a heart strong enough to carry them both home.